Hello class, and welcome to, let's make sure this is working here, there we go. Hello class, and welcome to the video for how to complete quiz number 5. And you'll notice quiz number 5 isn't just one chapter, it's chapter 6 and chapter 7. So right down here is quiz number 5. So I'm going to work on chapter number 6 with you in this video, and then there'll be a separate video for chapter number 7 for quiz 5. But you're going to have to submit both of them to me for quiz 5. I'd recommend you just save the files and then submit it all at once. That way you can just do it in one email. It's less email in my inbox as well. But we're going to start with chapter 6 here. So I have it open up in my Kindle edition of the book. I'm going to exit out of this, and I'm going to go to Foundations of Web Design website and download the exercise files. And here you can see we're going to be looking at HTML attributes. So I'll go to Dropbox, download them. Now I'm just going to download them to my downloads folder and work with them from there. So I still have to extract it, of course, but I mean, you do what you need to do. So I've already been telling a lot of you, you need to be saving this in documents in a folder with your name on it to keep it organized, prevent it from being confusing later on. So I'm going to extract it to downloads, but you need to make sure you extract it to wherever it should go. So I'm gonna, let's see here, put it in, I'm just gonna have it in my downloads folder, select folder, and extract. And then I can see chapter 6 right up here. And here are my files. So, alright, let's take a look at the book, and we will start working our way through the textbook and get done with chapter number 6 as the first part of quiz number 5, I believe it was. Alright, attributes permit you to assign additional information to HTML elements. You've already seen some in action, like href attribute used with the anchor element. I'm covering only a few of the most essential attributes you need for a good foundation. However, there are many, many, many more at your disposal. Not disposable. So like I said with this course, it's a beginner course for HTML. So there's a lot. You're going to get a good foundation in this class, but there's still a lot more that you can learn outside this book. Now, bad attributes. There are many attributes beyond the basics, but there are some you should not use. Some are obsolete, and some look to style content, a task which should be reserved for CSS. The companion website points out several of the most notorious bad guy attributes. So you're going to want to stay away from some of the attributes. So the ones that are in here will be good for you. Of all the attributes, there are two that you'll see often that are extremely important for connecting CSS to elements. And we said cascading style sheets is how we design our HTML file. And CSS and HTML should always stay separate. There's the ID and class. And one more attribute that merits exploration is the role attribute. So we're going to start looking at those. HTML class attribute, you can see that header, I'm reading under that. HTML tags allow you to specify the type of element, such as paragraph, or H1, which is top level heading, or div, which is a generic division or section. You can add a class attribute with one or more values to assign one or more subtypes to the element. The best way to learn is to get your hands dirty using the class attribute and assigning its values. So we're applying this information. The best way for you to learn it is for you to do it. And so that's why you're reading through this chapter. So upon opening 01 class attribute.html and the chapter 6 sample folder, you will see the description list of car manufacturers and their nationalities. So I'm going to open that up right now. So 01 class attribute, it's in my folder that I downloaded, I extracted it. So I'm going to double click, open it up, and you know what? Oh, actually I need to open a Komodo Edit. So I'm going to exit out and open up Komodo Edit, and then go to my folder from there. So while I'm waiting for this to load, you can see there in your book, textbook, there we go. And then let me open up the file here. Alright, 01 class attribute. And I'm just going to keep it half screen like this. Okay, so we have here automotive manufacturers. We can see the encoding. Actually, you know what? I'll expand it, and let's bring up the browser preview So that way we can look at, I'm going to put word wrap, select that, and we'll choose browser preview from the view. And I'll remember this for the selection and preview. And then here you can see it at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and rotate the split view so that way it looks like that. Alright, great. Let's keep on going here through the textbook. So a list of manufacturers shows the coding. While there are two separate DL lists, so let's look at that. DL list 1 right here, DL list 2 right here. While they're two separate DL lists, they're not differentiated from any other description lists which may not contain information about automotive manufacturers. If you want to identify all the lists that contain manufacturers, because you could add France, Germany, or Russia, you could consider assigning a value of MFG, short for manufacturer, to each opening DL element. Now, the question arises, which attribute should be used, class or ID? Well, let's take a look at that. Here's a set of rules you need to memorize. So, I mean, you want to stick in your head. It's going to help you later on. I'm not going to force you or quiz you over it, but you do want to know this. First off, class attribute values can be used unlimited times in the same document on different elements and across multiple documents. ID attribute values can only be used once in the same document, but can be used again in different documents. An illustration helps determine which attribute to use. And you can kind of look at it here. Class attribute, they use the example of dog. And you can use it the same time. You can use it for every time dog comes up. So class, dog, 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 all throughout the document. Where an ID attribute, you can see they use it with Dalmatian, it's more specific, but you can only use it once in the document. So you can't use the ID and value combination again in this document, but you could in another one. So really, if it's a more general label value, you would want to use the class attribute. If it's more specific, using the ID. So the answer to the question is we're going to use the class attribute. So step 6.1.1. So add the class attribute with the value MFG to the opening DL elements. So opening DL elements, I have the opening one here and the opening one down here, and also it matches the textbook with the this here in the figure under that. So I'm going to type it in. I'm adding an attribute to the DL element. So this is the attribute I'm typing in. So DL class equals sign, and then I'm putting in quotations MFG, and then closing quotation marks. And it says here I need to do it to both of the opening elements. So I'm going to go down here, space, class, equals sign, quotation marks, MFG, quotation marks, all over again. I'm going to try to keep talking through everything I do, even the clicking, copying and pasting, things like that, so that way you can, to make sure that it's clear to you. I know some of you are confused when I didn't say exactly what I did that was outside of talking. So I just add that in, and then things may get repeated a lot, is what I'm trying to say. Now I'm going to save it, so I'm going to hold down Control and push the S button. And the way to tell whether or not you save a file, some of you may have noticed this, there's a little asterisk up here, and when I saved it, it disappeared. So if it looks like this, it's saved, but if it looks like that, it isn't saved. Okay, so you can see that little star asterisk right there. Alright, so we added those things in. Great. Saved it. Right there. Alright, if this affects nothing visually, what is the class attribute and its value doing? Because it didn't change anything in my preview over here. Well, let's take a look. It allows you to assign a subtype specific to what the DL elements contain and gives you a design hook for your CSS. In this case, you will assign a subtype of manufacturers for a given country. The manufacturer is a general topic for the specific topic of American or Japanese manufacturers. Ford, Honda, General Motors, Toyota, etc. So we're going to look at multiple values here. The class attribute can also accept multiple values. All you need to do is separate the values with a space. If you look further down in your class 01 class attribute document, you'll see paragraphs with class attributes, and those are down here. Both paragraphs have one value, FAQ, in common, and you can see it. But the second paragraph also contains a second value, important. Additionally, if there were other elements that merited the important value, we could add that value to an existing class attribute or add a class attribute as needed. So now that you've seen some basic uses of the class attribute in HTML, let's see how you can use it to style your document with CSS. And it says here CSS class selector. So let's open up 01 class.css. So I'm going to go up here to my open file button, click on that. And then I need to open up 01 class.css, which I believe is right here. There we go. So it's in, I'll show you again, the CSS folder. Double click 01 class and open. So I have my two tabs opened up here. And let's get started. In order to select the class attribute, simply type a period. Yeah, a period. Weird. So make sure you get this straight. And then it says here, HTML attribute class, CSS selector, period. And you can see UL class equals dogs, and then UL. And then in the CSS, you put period, dogs, background, light blue. Okay. So in CSS, the period can be used to represent the class attribute. That's the idea of it. To represent class, you put in the period. Don't cross attribute. It's extremely important that you never use the same value for both the class and ID attributes. Why? While there are a few reasons I could list, it simply becomes very confusing to keep the values organized between two attributes. And remember, CSS has its place. Your CSS rules will now be written with their own .css documents found in the .css folder. The HTML document already have the link element set up. So this is already set up with that link element to it. So step 6.2.1. Immediately after the class selector, write the class attribute name. So the HTML class MFG attribute and value combination would be selected by the following CSS rule. So for our CSS, we'll use the period for the class selector. Write the class selector for MFG over here. So I'm going to click right under here and put down a period because they said I need that. And you can already see I have these ones come up because of the file it's linked to. So MFG and then space, and I put in the curly brackets right there. Remember, attribute value names are sensitive. Attribute value names are case sensitive. That means if you capitalize a certain letter and you use the wrong capitalization, say it's all capitalized and you don't capitalize every letter, it won't work. So you need to make sure when writing the attribute value in CSS, it must be written exactly the same way it was in HTML. The HTML value, my capital N name, is not the same as the CSS value lowercase my name. It must be written the same way. So step 6.2.2. Now add the following CSS declarations to the rule. So I'm going to push enter, and I'm going to type in padding, colon, 10 pixels, semicolon, and then enter. Oh, I added too many D's. Let's get rid of that. There we go. And then let's keep on going. So border, semicolon, 1 pixel, solid black, semicolon. And then width, colon, 260 pixel, semicolon. So you can see I just took the stuff from the textbook, put it in here, and now I'm going to save. So Control and S. And I save it. So we add those declarations. Now when you view your HTML document in your browser, you see the intended result. So I'm going to refresh this over here, and you can see the result it's talking about. Now notice I have class attribute right now in my preview, not the CSS file, class attribute. So make sure if you're previewing it, you're looking at the right file, class attribute. So when I view it, you'll notice now you see the intended result. I have a box around each one, organizing. So with one CSS rule, there are borders around both of your lists. This is great. So step 623. Let's also style the paragraphs below the list. And remember, both have the value of FAQ for the class attribute. Your CSS rule set would use the period to select the class attribute and add the value FAQ immediately after. So I'm going to put it in here. Now this is for MFG, and he says here in the document, write other class selector examples for our paragraphs. And that's where I'm going to start typing. So period FAQ, so period referring to the class attribute we put in there. And then I'm going to type in margin and then hyphen and left, colon, 20 pixels, semicolon, padding, left, colon, 5 pixels, and then border, left, 2 pixels, solid, red. Yeah, I'm going to save the file. After writing out the CSS declarations and saving your document, which I just did, refresh the browser to see how both paragraphs are now indented. We'll click on that with a red line to the left and a little space between the line and the first letter, and it does exactly what I want to. So it just makes it more organized, makes it look a little bit better as well. Moving to the next page, or at least for me, my iPad is in landscape, how I have it organized, the orientation. Alright, figure 6.5, both paragraphs have been styled by selecting the same class value. Now, step 624. Let's also add another rule below the FAQ rule that selects the class attribute with the value of important. So I'm just going to click here. You'll notice my insertion point, that flashing line, is next to the curly bracket. I'm just going to press enter and then start typing in my info from under step 624. So period, important, curly bracket, enter, font, weight, colon, bold, semicolon, and then color, red, semicolon. I'm going to save it. Viewing the results, I'm going to press refresh here so we can. Viewing the results, you'll see that the new rule styled the last paragraph right down here's text to become bold and red. However, the paragraph still has all the characteristics from the previous rule, since there were two values applied to the class attribute. And an element with two class values retains styles of a previous rule while adding on new styles. So because we added two values to this one right here, because if I go look at the HTML, it has FAQ and important. So right now it's applying both of these to it over here. But this one only has FAQ applied to it because we only put FAQ there. That's what they're trying to say in the textbook. Now, HTML ID attribute. The ID attribute is similar to class attribute in that it doesn't style the document directly, but allows you to apply a unique identifier to an HTML document. So remember, once is enough. Whatever value you give to ID attribute can only be used once per document. Alright, in 02 ID attribute.html, you will return to your car manufacturer list. So I'm going to exit out of this tab. If it's saved, it'll just exit out. If it isn't, it'll ask you if you want to save it. So I'm going to exit out of that. I'm going to leave my browser preview up here for now. I may exit out later. And I need to open up 02 ID attribute.html. So I have to go back to my class, the exercise folder, or excuse me, the chapter folder, and then 02 ID attribute selected. Great. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change this here, the browser preview. I just click up here and I can change 01 to 02 and then change class to ID and push enter. And here I'm looking at this HTML file now. So you can do the same thing, just switch the text up here or browser preview, whatever you want to do. I'm going to click up here and select, oh, it's not letting me do word wrap. Hang on, let's try it again. There we go. I'm going to select word wrap so that way it shows correctly over here. Alright, so although you subtyped each DL element with the class attribute MFG, It says here it might be valuable to identify each list uniquely. Caution, overriding rules. Be careful using multiple class values because you could have conflicting declarations between two or more rules that style the same properties with different values of HTML. So here we have div class, FAQ, important, and then div. And then we show FAQ and important like this. And you don't want to mess that up. Basically, you don't want any rules that conflict with each other if you have the list. So, step 6.3.1. The first DL element will receive the ID attribute with the value American. So, first DL element, which is right here, is going to receive the ID attribute American in class MFG. So, we're looking at that. You can see it already there. The second, next, add an ID attribute with the value of Japanese to the second one. So for some reason it's telling us to add it, and it's already there. Great. The work is done for us. So it's already there, and it looks good. So you can just keep moving on to the next part. Now remember the ID rules. Once you've used the value for the ID attribute, you cannot use it again in the same document. Now that I've put this down, I can't use it again. However, you can use the same ID value combination in another HTML document. So ID attributes allow only one value ID equals content. ID attribute values cannot have spaces, so ID main content, this would be two values. ID attribute values are case sensitive, we already heard that. And so those are the rules we've already heard. Now that you know the basics of using the ID attribute, let's use it in CSS. So using ID versus class attributes. While the purpose of this demonstration is to help you understand how HTML ID attribute works, it should be used with great caution. In CSS, ID selectors are very powerful in terms of specificity and can create unnecessary headaches. I believe you'll find the class attribute a better solution than the ID attribute, as it's more flexible and easier to use in CSS. To read more on this topic, I suggest checking out Harry Roberts' website, csswizardry.com. So a production site might use the class attributes for all values. So again, we're using ID just so you have it, but otherwise class might be a better one for you. CSS ID selector heading. Let's look under that. As you saw in chapter 5, CSS uses the hashtag or pound to select the HTML ID attribute. So you can see it in figure 6.7 that is there. This makes as much sense as using the period for the class attribute. So anyway, so you have this clear. He's kind of making fun of HTML for choosing that, but that's what they did. So HTML attribute is ID. CSS ID selector is pound and then whatever after it. So you can see it in that. Moving on here past figure 6.7, like the CSS class period selector, the value comes immediately after the pound sign with no spaces. Step 6.4.1, open the CSS document id.css. So I'm going to close out my 01class.css file because I'm no longer using it, or not at this point anyways. And then select in the CSS folder ID right here, 02 ID. Great, so now we have it open. We can see I already have that information in there. Whenever you open an exercise file, always look for what they have written, because here our previous one, CSS rules from our class selector, so he did do that. And then newest CSS goes below, so I know for our CSS we'll use the hashtag or pound for the ID selector. We already have that, but put it down here below because you know it needs to go there since he wrote that down for you. Alright, you'll write a rule that selects the American value of ID pound attribute and apply a light blue value to the background color property. So I'm going to go and type that in. So pound American curly bracket, enter, background hyphen color colon light blue. Again, don't be afraid to pause this video if I'm going a little too fast. Pause, finish what I just did, and then keep moving on. In the browser, the style is applied to the description list that has the ID attribute with the value American. So I'm going to actually refresh 02 ID attribute, and you can see it's changed it just like in the textbook in figure 6.8. Now step 6.4.2, next add another CSS rule using the ID pound selector with the value of Japanese and apply a light salmon value to the background color property. So I'm going to type in what the textbook tells me right here under my American let's see, attribute here. So pound Japanese curly bracket background, oh I need to press enter first, background, enter, background hyphen color colon light salmon semicolon and save. And then I'm going to refresh my file right over here, and you can see it's changed the color. So it helps make it stand out more between the two. Now the specificity power of ID selectors. Step 6.4, with the ID selector, so that's pound, you can be much more specific with your CSS selectors. Just to show how much more powerful the ID selectors are than class selectors, add a new rule using the class selector with the MFG value and apply a green value to the background color property. So I can see my old text in the picture there. I'm going to put my new rule right under it. So period MFG space curly bracket. And this one they didn't push enter, so I'm just going to press space and type in background color hyphen, or excuse me, background hyphen color green semicolon and space. There we go. I save it, refresh it. Now you might think that your two lists that both have the class attribute with the value of MFG would now have a green background color. However, when you refresh the page, you'll notice there's no green background for either list. The CSS specificity power of the ID attribute trumps the class attribute. So what he's trying to say is, if you set something with an ID attribute like this, and then you try to do something different with a class attribute like this part, the ID attribute will always override it. And that's why there's no green, is because this is class attribute, which the ID attribute or selector always overcomes that. Now remember, ID weighs more than class selectors, so you can see that already there. I'm going to keep on talking from HTML role attributes so we can keep moving through this chapter. Try to get this done as quickly as possible for you here in the video. Another attribute worth mentioning or noting is the YARIA Web Accessibility Initiative Accessible Rich Internet Applications Landmark Role Attribute. So role attribute is what we're talking about. This attribute has some great benefits. First, it's really geared to help websites become more accessible to users with disabilities. Screen reading browsers utilize the role attribute in ways other browsers don't, so see the website for more information. Second, it helps describe your document structure for assistive devices and bots from search engines. Adding ARIA landmarks to your existing site or to a site you're developing provides useful global navigation features and aids understanding of content structure for users. Over time, the necessity of explicitly assigning landmarks will lessen as browsers build in ARIA landmark roles to newer HTML element semantics. There is widespread support for ARIA landmarks to browsers and screen readers, and it shows the page it's from. So basically, this is to help out people with disabilities or browsers that are limited in what they can do. ARIA landmarks describe the purposes of different areas of a page in a way that assistive technologies can understand. They are intended as navigational landmarks. Now, limited role choices. Unlike the class and ID attributes, the caveat about using the ARIA role attribute is that its value is limited to predetermined values. Hooking styles. Like the class and ID attributes, the role attribute will do nothing visually, but can be used as a styling hook for CSS. In the document 03 role attribute.html, you'll incorporate the role attribute into your HTML attributes. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of these two because I'm not really using them anymore. Let's open our new file. So I'm going to go to, I have to open up my folder again. I probably could have waited to open it up, and choose 03 role attribute. Alright, we're on the third file. I'm going to exit out this one, and I'm going to set this to wrap my word wrap, so that way it stays on my screen. And then I'm also going to do browser preview right away, so that way you can see it while we are working on it. There we go. Kind of swap the two, but that's okay. Alright. ARIA landmark banner. The banner role value helps define a region that applies to the entire site, like the name of the company, a product, or a person for a portfolio site. So step 651 in the 03 role attribute.html document, reminding us to open that other HTML file, which you should have already done. You have a div element containing a header 1 and a header 2. So let's find those here in the div element, header 1, header 2, right here in my first div element div class container, and shows in the textbook. Well, in ARIA landmark navigation, so we've looked at banner, now navigation. The navigation role value defines the navigation section of your website. So if you have a spot with a bunch of links to help them navigate, this is where it would be. And so since the navigation role is not allowed on the UL element, you can use the HTML5 nav element. And you can see here we have div role. Let's find that here. If I can find it here in the document. Let's see. Oh, okay, it looks like it's just showing it in the textbook instead, so since it doesn't appear to be in the document. Anyways, so you can see it here in your textbook, div role, banner, role attributes, all that here. So yeah, you could see it there. And examples, nav role, navigation. We don't have it in our file, but we do have it in the textbooks. Alright, banner day for the header. The HTML5 equivalent to the banner role would be a header element, and it's advised that you use the two together. However, while it's possible to have more than one header element, you should not mark more than one element with the banner role. So you can do more than one header, but don't do more than one banner. And you can see it inside the textbook. And W3C nav specification. The nav element represents a section of a page that links to other pages or to parts within the page, a section with navigation links. ARIA landmark main. Now the main role value defines your main content area and should not be used more than once in the same document. So we're on step 653. We're continuing on. In the next empty div element, add the role element. Or excuse me, and assign the main landmark value. So I'm going to go down to this one here, right above header 2, press space, and type in role equals main, quotation marks there. You can see I added in. I'm going to save it. You notice it doesn't really change anything. That's okay. And then ARIA landmark complementary. The complementary role value defines a supporting section of the document that relates to the area defined as the main. So see the previous landmark we just made. So this is what complements the info in the main section. So this is our main section right here. Complementary is next. So I'm going to find where it needs to go. And you can see here it's right above this area here. So div role, complementary, and it's this section here. So right above here in my div element, I'm going to press space and add the attribute role equal sign quotation mark complementary quotation mark and save it. Alright, moving on. ARIA landmark content info. The content info landmark value normally resides at the end of your document and defines the area containing footnotes, copyrights, link to privacy statements, etc. So the main HTML5 equivalent. The HTML5 equivalent to the main role would be the main tag. It's advised that you use the two together, and you can see an example of that. Is it related? Well, if the text is completely unrelated to the main topic, do not use the role complementary attribute, because there's no point. It doesn't complement something different. Like an aside, the complementary role has some similarities to the HTML5 aside tag. Content info footer. While there is no specific HTML5 equivalent to the content info landmark, you could place it on a footer tag residing at the end of the document. So footer role, content info, all that stuff, we're kind of breezing through it here. HTML5 solution. If you've used the HTML5 tags, the 03 role HTML5.html document shows you the completed version. And you could look at that there. But let's keep moving on. Alright. Step 6.5.5. To the div that contains your copyright info, add role content info. So I'm going to go down here to the div tag that is dividing my copyright info. I'm going to press space, type in role, equal sign, quotation marks, content info, and quotation marks, and save it. So I just added that tag right in there. So it's down here in your file. We're going to do it. Double check your work. The document 03 role attribute.html in the solutions folder has all this written out so you can double check your result. So I'm not going to go and look through that here for the sake of time, but you're going to want to do that to make sure you completed it properly, so that way you can submit to me the correct file. So I won't, because for sake of time of the video, but you do that. Now moving on here, remember to validate yourself. All along the way, it's good to validate, see website, your code to catch any errors. There will be links on the website to help you in the use of the role attribute. You could check that. Just double check the solutions folder or file will help you. Now, what is the result? Visually, your document looks no different than when you started, but you did define your document structure, so assistive technologies can allow keyboard navigation from region to region, basically from different parts of your document to the next one. A visual outline of the layout using ARIA landmark role attribute is there in figure 6.11, and yes, there are other landmark values, ARIA landmark values. You'll use form and search when you learn about HTML form elements later in the book. For now, let's see how you can target attributes to style your page. So we're going to look at CSS attribute selectors. When you use CSS to select the role attribute, you'll have to use a different technique than you've seen thus far. In CSS, there is no symbol / sign to select the role attribute. So you need to create an attribute selector. Do this by writing out the attribute name along with its value and wrapping them in the bracket. So this is a normal one, not curly, but the normal brackets. So you can see that right there. And I'm going to put that into my document here. But I'm not going to do it yet because this is my HTML file. I need to add it to the CSS file. So it says here open 03 role.css in the document. So let's do that right now. So CSS folder, I clicked on the open folder or file button, and I choose 03 role. And add example CSS here. So I'm going to type in selector, I need to put in div role. I put in brackets role equal sign banner quotation marks, and then I'm going to push space, curly brackets, enter, background color or background hyphen color, colon, light blue. So you can see I basically created that attribute selector like this, and they showed an example in the textbook of how you could do it, but we did a different one here in the second part. And so the CSS attribute selector looks a little like HTML. And when viewing your HTML document in the browser, you should now see a light blue landmark around the banner landmark location. So I'm going to save the file, and then I'm going to refresh this one. And it says here, I should see a blue banner. Now obviously it didn't come up in mine here, so I'm going to take a look here at my coding, which is what you would need to do as well, and check that out. I'm going to get rid of the space here because that was different from it. And then it looks like I got background color, colon's right, light blue, semicolon, save it, and let's try it again. Alright, so I'm going to double check it in my browser. Let's see if it comes up properly then. Nope. Okay, let me troubleshoot here and see what's going on. Okay, so I looked into it and I realized here in the hustle and bustle of moving through the book as quickly as possible, I neglected to add that banner attribute. So you didn't add it either, probably because I breezed past it. So let's go back here to our file, 03 role attribute, look at the coding, and over here just under the body, opening body tag, div class container, right under here is this div tag. I was supposed to add in role attribute equals banner. Forgot to add that. Save it, and you'll notice as soon as I save it, now role.css works because of the banner attribute being selected. So that was why that didn't work. So make sure you add that in here. And then let's go back to the textbook here. So alright, and then you can see the blue. So figure 6.12 is in there now. Looks good. Keep playing. You can play around by adding other background colors to the other role attribute of the value pairs. You could do that. You don't have to do that, but if you want to do it for fun, that's fine. So if you open 03 role attribute.html in the solutions folder, you see how the layout could look using CSS. And if you're really up for the challenge, look at 03 role.css in the solutions/CSS folder and see the rules developed for this layout. While some things will make sense now, other declarations may take a few more chapters to understand, and that's fine. Wrapping things up. So those are the basics of using the ID and class attributes and selectors, the most common attributes and selectors you'll use in HTML and CSS. Also, you got a brief introduction to the useful and accessible ARIA role attribute, and this attribute will help define regions such as banner, navigation, main, complementary, content info, form, and search, and structure your HTML document. So it says here, time to take a break. We'll delve in even further into CSS typography, and then remember more on the website, and make sure you check out the website section on Chapter 6 to learn more from other resources and for video tutorials. So I'm creating the video tutorial because he doesn't have it on his website. I don't know where they went, but the textbook, of course, is still good. So this is how you complete Chapter 6, step-by-step guide. So make sure you save that. Now don't submit it to me yet for your class through Plus Portals yet. Finish chapter number 7, and then you are going to zip these two folders into one big file and submit it to me as your quiz. So make sure you do that before sending it all to me. Just do it as one big email. Makes it a lot easier for me, makes it easier for you. So, and that again is a step-by-step guide in completing chapter number 6.